In the year of our Lord 1254, in the serene canals and marble palaces of Venice, Marco Polo was born into a merchant family of modest means but grand ambition. His father, Niccolò Polo, and his uncle, Maffeo, had already traveled beyond the seas, trading silks, spices, and tales of lands unseen by most Europeans. Marco's mother died when he was very young, and from his earliest memory he was drawn to the stories his father returned with, of Khans, desert winds, strange languages, of gold and the kingdoms of Cathay. Venice in the mid-13th century was already a hub, a gateway between East and West. Venetian ships plied the Adriatic, carried goods from Byzantium and beyond. The houses along the Rialto shimmered with silks and stained glass windows. The smell of salt water mingled with garlic and fish in the markets. Here Marco grew up learning arithmetic, languages, and the trader's instinct. The measure of weight, the cost of goods, the delicate balance between risk and reward. Around 1260, Niccolò and Maffeo Polo embarked on a trading mission that led them to Constantinople and the courts of the Mongol Empire. Eventually, they reached Kublai Khan's court in what the Polos called Cathay, present-day northern China, under the rule of the Yuan dynasty. They brought back gifts, stories, and a request for the Khan to send emissaries to the Pope and to learn more of Christian lands. But they returned to Venice, leaving young Marco in the home that smelled of trade winds and exotic tales. When Marco was about 17 in 1271, he joined his father and uncle on the great journey east. Wrapped in the dusty roads of the Middle East, through Persia, over mountains and deserts, facing bandits, sandstorms, and hunger. The route was long, from Venice through the Mediterranean, crossing to Acre, then on to the caravan paths of Anatolia, Persia, and into Central Asia. They carried letters of safe passage, trade wares, precious gems, silks, spices, and the blessings of merchant guilds and nobility who looked to profit as much as explore. At each stop, they marveled at the cities. In Tabriz, they saw bazaars so crowded they overflowed into alleys. In the high passes of the Pamirs, nights were bitter cold, stars more vivid than the lights of home. Through Kashgar and along the edges of the Gobi, the journey tested the body and the soul. But Marco was not discouraged. He learned Persian, Mongolian phrases, and the customs of Khans and peasants. He saw Buddhist monasteries, Muslim mosques, Zoroastrian fire temples. Each culture expanded his understanding of trade, religion, empire. After years of travel, the Polos reached the court of Kublai Khan. Khan was a ruler of vast dominion, seated in Khanbalik, today's Beijing, supreme over countless provinces. To enter his court was to see unimaginable scale. Palaces of white stone, halls resounding with many tongues, golden dragons, silk carpets, officials in fur-trimmed robes. Khan welcomed the Polos, impressed by their knowledge, their honesty in trade, and their curiosity. For Marco, this was a world unlike any other. Paper money, postal stations that carried messages across the empire, vast canals, walls, and gates. During his time at the Khan's court, Marco Polo became more than a merchant. He was an envoy, an observer, a trusted intermediary. He traveled on behalf of the Khan across provinces, overseeing trade caravans, reporting on provinces, the value of horses, the quality of gold, the variety of spices. He documented mines in Yunnan, silk producers, engineers building canals, fishermen by large rivers. Some accounts he collected himself, others he heard from locals, sometimes translating through others. He always noted what seemed ordinary to them, but extraordinary to someone from Venice. While the Polos were in Cathay, Marco's reputation as Il Milione began to take form. Stories of his wealth and his knowledge began to spread back in Europe, even before any manuscript arrived. Silk, coal, gunpowder, paper. These unknown goods caught European imagination. Yet not everything in the stories was easily believed. Some scholars doubted whether Marco had truly seen some of the marvels he described, or whether he later embellished accounts from hearsay. But Marco always maintained what he saw was true to what he witnessed. Hotels for travelers, pagodas, markets where people bartered in silver coins stamped by the Khan, and bridges over rivers so wide that travelers need weeks to cross. After nearly 2 decades under Mongol rule, witnessing droughts, wars, festivals, coronations, Marco felt the pull of home. Trade routes grew dangerous again. Political intrigue at home, in Venice, required that he return. He prepared gifts for powerful rulers, manuscripts on the structure of the Khan's empire, and stories to tell. Then in the mid-1290s, the Polos began the long return journey, south from China to Southeast Asia, through Sumatra, across the Indian Ocean to the port of Hormuz, then by sea to the Arabian Peninsula, through the Persian Gulf, then overland back to Venice. In 1295, Marco Polo finally returned to Venice. He was in his 40s. His home city had changed. He came back with silks, gems, exotic woods, tales of dragons, of gold, spices, inventions. He carried knowledge that Europe had never seen. Paper, printing techniques, coal, dishes of porcelain, charts of geography. Venice welcomed him as a merchant, though not without skepticism. Many said these stories were puffed up, but Marco's own family believed him. His writings with Rustichello da Pisa, whom he met in prison, turned his stories into the travels of Marco Polo. In prison, captured during a war between Venice and Genoa in 1298, Marco dictated his stories to Rustichello. The travels spread across Europe. Copies were translated into French, Latin, Venetian dialects. Each translation carried slight differences. Some manuscripts included embellishments, some omitted detail. But the core remained, that Polo had traveled far, that Asia was a realm of marvels and complex societies, that the East already had great roads, trade systems, bureaucracy, and marvels before contact with Europe. His life in Venice after return was quieter. He became a respected merchant. Scholars debated the truth of his accounts. Some maps began to include places he described. Venice traded silk and porcelain along routes made safer by knowledge Marco accorded. He died around 1324, leaving behind not just riches, but a new awareness in Europe, that the world was larger, grander, and more interconnected than anybody had thought. The Mongol Empire stretched farther than any other in human history. From the steppes of Russia to the coasts of China, from the Persian deserts to the jungles of Burma. When Marco Polo entered Kublai Khan's court, he was stepping into the beating heart of that empire, a place where East met West, where nomadic tradition fused with Chinese sophistication. Kublai Khan, grandson of the legendary Genghis Khan, was not only a conqueror but a visionary statesman. He had built his capital at Khanbalik, today's Beijing, transforming it into a city of imperial splendor. Towering palaces lined with golden tiles, vast gardens filled with peacocks and cranes, and halls perfumed with incense from India and Arabia. The Khan's court was a crossroads of the world. There were Persian astrologers, Arab merchants, Chinese engineers, and Tibetan monks. Marco Polo and his family arrived weary from years of travel, but their reputation had preceded them. The Khan was fascinated by Europeans, a rarity in his court, and especially by those who could bring tales of the distant lands at the edge of his empire. In the grand audience hall, amid banners of red and gold, Kublai received the Polos with honor. He questioned them through interpreters about Rome, the Pope, and the kings of the West. Marco's intelligence and curiosity quickly won the Khan's favor. The emperor, impressed by his grasp of languages and his ability to adapt, soon appointed him to serve as an emissary, a trusted observer sent to distant corners of the empire. For nearly 17 years, Marco Polo traveled under Kublai Khan's command, from the rice terraces of Yunnan to the palaces of Hangzhou, from the deserts of Mongolia to the island ports of the South China Sea. Everywhere he went, Marco kept a keen eye for detail. He described cities with canals like Venice, bridges that spanned entire rivers, and markets filled with spices, silk, and gemstones. He was amazed at how advanced the East was compared to Europe. Paper money was already in use across the empire, stamped with the seal of the Khan, a concept that would not reach Europe for centuries. The postal system, with stations every few miles, allowed messages to travel faster than any in the known world. Marco marveled at the agricultural richness of China, rice paddies shimmering in the sun, tea leaves drying on bamboo mats, and mulberry trees feeding silkworms. He documented how salt, silk, and porcelain were produced and how each region had its own customs, dialects, and foods. He wrote of cities like Hangzhou, which he called the finest and most splendid in the world, with a population in the millions, unimaginable to medieval Europeans. He saw temples filled with golden statues, pagodas rising above the mists, and monks turning prayer wheels in the shadow of mountains. In Tibet, he encountered Buddhism's rituals, the spinning of wheels, the chanting of mantras, and the belief in reincarnation. In India and Burma, he observed Hindu and Muslim merchants trading spices and ivory. Marco recorded all of it, not merely as a traveler, but as an observer of civilizations. At the Khan's palace, Marco would often attend the great ceremonies of state. Kublai Khan ruled from his city of the celestial emperor, a realm of discipline and opulence. He governed through an intricate bureaucracy that recorded everything: taxes, grain harvests, military campaigns. The emperor's council included scholars from every nation of his dominion, and Marco was one of the few foreigners trusted to attend. Polo described the Khan's New Year festivals. 10,000 white horses paraded before the palace, golden banners fluttering in the wind. The emperor seated upon a throne of carved ivory, his courtiers kneeling in reverence. At feasts, hundreds of dishes were served, from roasted peacock to rice wine sweetened with honey. Acrobats performed. Musicians from Persia played lutes beside drummers from Cathay. But even within such splendor, there were shadows. Marco witnessed the cruelty of Mongol justice: executions, punishments, and wars against rebels. He saw cities destroyed and rebuilt, armies riding for months across frozen plains. The empire's peace was held together by power and fear. And yet, through this vast dominion, ideas and inventions flowed freely. Gunpowder, the compass, printing, paper currency, all of which would later ignite Europe's Renaissance. Over time, Marco became almost like a son to Kublai Khan. The emperor valued his insight and honesty. The Venetian, in turn, admired the Khan's tolerance and intellect. In his writings, Marco described Kublai not as a barbarian, but as a wise ruler who valued merit over birth, knowledge over pride. Still, after nearly 2 decades, Marco and his family longed to return home. They had come to the East as merchants and had become servants of an emperor. But Venice, their homeland, called to them. Kublai Khan was reluctant to let them go. It was only when a Persian princess needed escort to her betrothed prince that the Khan allowed the Polos to depart, on the condition they safeguard her across seas and deserts. Their return was perilous. They journeyed by sea through the jungles of Sumatra, across monsoon-swept oceans to the Indian ports. Many of their companions perished. Storms wrecked ships, diseases struck, and pirates prowled the coastlines. But after years of hardship, they finally crossed the Persian Gulf and made their way back to the familiar waters of the Mediterranean. When they stepped once more onto the soil of Venice in 1295, no one recognized them. They were tanned, worn, dressed in Mongol robes. But when they opened their chests and revealed silk, gold, and jewels from the east, astonishment filled the city. The men believed dead had returned, richer than anyone could have imagined. When Marco Polo returned to Venice in 1295, the city was at the height of its maritime power. Venetian ships ruled the Adriatic, and merchants traded with Egypt, Byzantium, and beyond. Yet few could have imagined that one of their own had ventured farther than any European before him, across deserts, mountains, and oceans to the court of the great Khan. The Polo's sudden reappearance caused both fascination and disbelief. Many in Venice refused to believe that these sun-browned men, speaking with strange accents and dressed in Eastern robes, were truly the same family that had vanished a quarter of a century earlier. To silence doubt, Marco and his relatives invited the city's nobles to a banquet. At the end of the meal, they cut open the seams of their coarse Mongol garments, and out spilled rubies, emeralds, sapphires, and diamonds. The crowd gasped in amazement. The Polos, once obscure merchants, were now among the richest men in Venice. Marco soon resumed his place in the merchant guilds, helping his family rebuild their trading networks. But peace did not last long. In 1298, Venice went to war with its rival maritime republic, Genoa. Marco commanded a Venetian galley in one of the naval battles. a testament to his courage and loyalty. The battle was fierce and Marco was captured. He found himself imprisoned in Genoa, surrounded by soldiers, sailors, and wanderers, men with their own tales of adventure. Among them was Rustichello da Pisa, a writer of romances. Rustichello was captivated by Marco's stories of the East, of Kublai Khan, the silk markets of Cathay, and the wonders of Asia. In the dim light of the prison cell, Marco began to dictate his memories. Rustichello wrote them down in the language of medieval French, giving the world one of the most remarkable travel accounts ever written, Il Milione, known today as the Travels of Marco Polo. The book was unlike anything Europe had seen. It described lands of immense wealth and sophistication, cities larger than any in Europe, roads that stretched for thousands of miles, paper money backed by imperial decree, coal that burned hotter than wood, and foods and spices unknown in the West. Readers were astonished. Some believed Marco's account was a miracle of discovery. Others dismissed it as fantasy. How could a man claim to have seen black stones that burned like fire, serpents longer than ships, and people who used compasses to navigate the seas? Yet as time passed, explorers and scholars began to find truth in Marco's words. His routes matched ancient trade paths. His descriptions of geography, climate, and customs proved remarkably accurate. Even Chinese records mention the arrival of Polo, the foreign envoy who served the Great Khan. When Marco was finally released from prison, he returned to Venice as both hero and curiosity. His book spread across Europe in manuscript form, copied and translated into Latin, Italian, and other languages. Though printing had not yet been invented, the travels circulated widely among scholars, cartographers, and dreamers. Marco lived out his remaining years in comfort, respected but sometimes doubted. In his will, he referred to his possessions as modest, though his influence was anything but. He married Donata Bador, a woman from a noble Venetian family, and had 3 daughters. Even in his old age, Marco never wavered from the truth of his account. When skeptics questioned him, he reportedly replied, "I have not told the half of what I saw." He died in 1324, surrounded by his family, and was buried in the Church of San Lorenzo in Venice. But Marco Polo's journey did not end with his death. His book became a bridge between worlds. It shaped how Europe imagined Asia for centuries. It inspired mapmakers like Fra Mauro and explorers like Prince Henry the Navigator. Most famously, more than 150 years later, a young Italian sailor named Christopher Columbus carried a copy of the Travels of Marco Polo on his voyages, annotated in the margins with his own notes. Columbus believed Marco's descriptions of Cathay and Cipangu, Japan, proved that Asia could be reached by sailing west. In that way, Marco Polo indirectly set in motion the age of exploration, the era that would connect the world by sea and change human history forever. Even today, historians debate certain aspects of his journey, whether he truly reached every place he described or whether some of his accounts were secondhand. But no one disputes his impact. The Travels of Marco Polo expanded Europe's imagination, uniting myth and reality into a single story of discovery. It taught Europeans that the East was not a land of monsters or mystery, but of powerful empires, advanced technologies, and rich cultures. His detailed notes on trade goods, routes, and customs became reference material for merchants and geographers for centuries. Marco Polo's life was not just a tale of exploration, it was the story of curiosity itself. He was a man who dared to cross boundaries of geography, language, and belief. From the canals of Venice to the steppes of Mongolia, from deserts of Persia to the palaces of China, his journey embodied the spirit of adventure that defines humanity. In the end, Marco Polo's greatest discovery was not gold or silk, it was knowledge. His travels opened the Silk Road not only to trade, but to understanding. And through his words, that road remains open, connecting East and West centuries after his death.